So there's been a lot of talk about how our attention spans are probably collectively getting shorter, and how that's probably a bad thing. I think both of those things are probably mostly true, but how does this translate to the world of cinema? One would think that this reported change in attention spans would lead to a change in the way editors put movies together. The best metric I know for looking at this is average shot length, or ASL, typically defined as the length of time between cuts. So apart from anomalies like split screen and crossfades and other elements that make it a little bit tough to define what exactly a shot is, it's a pretty straightforward metric, and it's usually found by taking a few random samples out of a film rather than looking at the film as a whole, which is important to acknowledge for our purposes. We'll get to movies in a second, but we're also here to talk about the digital age and its consequences on the world of cinema and culture at large. And for the record, I don't think you can separate cinema from online entertainment very effectively these days. There's a lot of low-budget independent movies that you can watch for free on YouTube that I would argue qualify as a higher level of cinema than even some big-budget blockbuster Hollywood movies. And conversely, there are some big-budget blockbuster Hollywood movies that bear a striking and somewhat concerning resemblance to brain rot. At this point in time, it makes more sense to look at all entertainment media in the context of the broader media landscape. So let's first do the whole internet thing. For an idea of the current state of internet video entertainment, let's look at the guy who is arguably largely responsible for the rise of what we call retention editing, the biggest YouTuber in the world, MrBeast. For context, MrBeast essentially revolutionized YouTube by taking a very analytical approach to figuring out what works and what doesn't in terms of engaging and retaining viewers.
You basically want to remove every dull moment. Everyone's videos start like this, and then it levels off. So you want to reduce the amount of people that click off on the audience retention graph.
He made entertainment a science, popularizing this strange form of loud, colorful, hyper-engaging content.
This video is gonna be the craziest video you've ever seen!
Weirdly, he has recently kind of cut down on this hyper-edited style and settled for a slower pace. But for the sake of the argument, let's look at peak brain rot retention editing MrBeast.
We have a real tank, an entire carnival, I'm blowing up a bank.
One source found that a 2023 video of his had about 38 cuts in a span of 60 seconds, giving him an average shot length of about 1.6 seconds. Let's put that into perspective. Michael Bay, a director known for the Transformers movies, stuff like that, even he averages out across his career at an average shot length of about 3 seconds. And remember how I said MrBeast is slowing down his editing pace? Well, his current pace is closer to what you might see in something like a Michael Bay movie with an average shot length of around 2.6 seconds, which is, again, still pretty fast, still arguably nauseating to watch, but a year or two ago, I would have never believed that MrBeast, of all people, would come out and do an interview where he talked about being in support of a slower-paced editing style. Like, that just seemed out of the realm of possibility. For better or for worse, though, I think that TikTok, Instagram Reels, all of these short video platforms are carrying the torch that was once carried by this style of YouTube video, leaving YouTube and other platforms a place where long-form, slower-paced content is actually kind of starting to make a comeback, which has been observed by a few different people at this point. So that's our very brief survey of editing pace when it comes to internet video content. Now let's move on to the mainstream film industry. About 15 years ago, a psychologist at Cornell University named James Cutting, which, given the subject matter of this video, I cannot believe that that is his real name, but he compiled some data about trends in film over time. When looking at ASL, he found, not too surprisingly, that there was a substantial decrease between 1935 and 2010, meaning that movies adopted a much faster-paced editing style. And when I say like a distinct and noticeable change, we're talking 12 seconds to about 2.5 seconds. But is that really surprising? Think about the early days of cinema. Cinema's earliest pioneers were essentially doing filmed theater. A single shot would be the entire scene. Now, that's not exactly the state of things in 1935, but at that point, film is still kind of doing a little bit of work to learn its own path and distinguish itself from its theatrical roots. It took filmmakers a long time to kind of adapt to the idea that the camera can be used as a storytelling tool without pulling viewers out of the story itself, which was a commonly held concern at the time. So you see close-ups and insert shots and just more sort of experimental shot setups in general becoming a thing over time. And as there are more shots within a single scene, of course the editing pace is going to be faster, right? It's worth noting that this is an example of how a change in ASL can have absolutely nothing to do with attention spans. Innovation and the move to more complex movies with more shot setups was merely the result of inevitable and natural advancement of film as an art form. So 1935 to 2010 is a predictable decrease, but what about something a little bit more recent? Let's say 1984 to 2020. So I actually wrote an entire research paper on this subject. Here's what I found and how. Because I wrote this for my IB Mathematics Applications and Interpretations course last year, we will unfortunately be dealing with a little bit of math. Thankfully though, this paper was written by a person with very little interest or expertise or skill in that area, so to all of my fellow fine arts students out there, don't worry, we're going to be keeping the math part very, very simple. Let's talk sampling method really quick. Since my goal was to look specifically at popular film, I collected data from the top 10 highest grossing movies of each calendar year between 1984 and 2020. Keep in mind, I don't care what these movies grossed, the actual dollar amount is not relevant to me and will not be considered as a variable, nor will its relative ranking in the list for that year, if that makes sense. My data was collected from a website called Cinemetrics, a project launched by the University of Chicago to track data about movies. Now, unfortunately, the database does not include every movie ever made, so some years I only had a few of the top 10, while other years were much more complete with only 1 or 2 data points missing. I only decided to omit one movie from consideration entirely. The second highest grossing movie of the year 2020 was Sam Mendes's 1917, which, if you don't remember, made the stylistic choice to consist of long, unbroken takes. Since this was a very uncommon, unconventional, and sort of out-of-place choice at the time, I just sort of decided to take it out because I thought it would create a really ugly outlier. When I collected everything, I had ASLs for 189 movies over a 37-year period. Now, ideally, this would have been about 370 movies, but again, Cinemetrics doesn't include every movie ever made. If you've taken a high school math class in the last 5 to 10 years, I apologize for the unpleasant memories that I'm about to dredge up by saying this, but I used online graphing software Desmos to plot on a graph the yearly averages. The X values you see represent years since 1984, meaning that 0 is 1984 and 36 is the year 2020. Now here's what all of that looks like with a line of best fit. In terms of validating our hypothesis, things are looking pretty good. But unfortunately, we need something a little bit better than looking good. Pearson's correlation coefficient is a value between -1 and 1, describing the relationship between two variables. Generally, an R value is considered significant if its absolute value is greater than 0.7. So our R value of -0.7146 just barely clears it, but it does. On our graph though, we've got two kind of ugly, very visible outliers going on. Let's just remove those from the graph just for funsies and see what things look like without them. And the R value is even better. So this data suggests a gradual and consistently observable decrease in average shot length between 1984 and 2020. That is all the math we need for today. Let's get back into the theoretical stuff. A lot of people are going to go straight to the attention span explanation here, but I really don't think things are so simple. I don't have any data on this, so I can't back it up, but action and adventure films have become somewhat ubiquitous to the point where if you look at the top 10 films every year, as you creep towards 2020, they start to make up nearly the entire top 10 every single year. So maybe the same types of movies aren't being edited in different ways. Maybe each genre has stayed mostly within its own conventions, but the types of films that are popular with audiences have changed over time. After all, there were action films with very low ASLs in the 80s and 90s too, so maybe it isn't how things are being made, but what we, as a culture, are watching. And this trend can't continue forever. There has to be an asymptote on this graph somewhere. After all, average shot length can't reach or exceed 0 seconds. James Cutting even theorized earlier on that editing that is too fast for too long will disorient and sort of alienate audiences. Again, that 15-year-old data is sort of outdated now because a lot of people have gotten very used to watching very fast-paced edits by watching YouTube, by watching TikTok, that sort of thing. So if I had to guess, if you were to repeat his research from 15 years ago, the threshold for disorienting an audience would be a lot higher than it used to be. What if, this is a crazy idea, what if the trend line starts going in the other direction? There seems to have been a subtle but not imperceptible change in viewing habits over the last couple of years. A24 is a studio that makes weird, artsy movies that are very popular with a substantial number of people. The biggest movie event of 2023 was Barbenheimer. And just to be clear, neither of these films even had a particularly long average shot length. Oppenheimer was actually very notable for its fast and frenetic editing style, so that provides a great example of how fast editing doesn't necessarily equal brain rot. Barbie was admittedly pretty commercial and surface level, but it was a high concept feminist film from a former art house director with no basis in existing film franchises or extended universes. Oppenheimer was a 3-hour black and white R-rated historical drama, and people turned out in droves for both of these movies. I think that's a good thing, and I think that suggests some evidence that this sort of brain rot style of film editing that we've seen might be something that becomes a thing of the past before too long, or at least goes out of style just to come back in style later on. So is film editing getting faster? Yes, pretty undoubtedly so, but will it continue doing that? Maybe, maybe not. Is that bad? Maybe in some cases, maybe on some level, but inherently, no. What really matters is that we continue doing what we seem to have started doing in larger numbers again, which is supporting films that have a genuine interest in artistry and compelling storytelling techniques. And if those films have fast-paced edits, that's fine. That doesn't in itself make us dumber. That is it for today's video. I will see you in the next one. Until then, I'm Sam Morgan, and this is Pictures Up.